Hey guys, my name is Dejan Bojkov. I'm Grandmaster from Bulgaria. Today we're starting a new series. This time they're related to the Zugzwang, and Zugzwang is one of the key factors which is determining the endgame from the middle game, according to the second world champion Emanuel Lasker. There are some other factors, but we are going to concentrate on this one. And with the latest examples, you will see that Zugzwang is not only related to the endgame, but to some other aspects of the games as well. But let's jump into the Zugzwang itself and let's have a look at our first position. In most of the cases, Zugzwang is a tool which is helping us to win a one position. So basically the idea of the Zugzwang is to force the opponent to make a move, even if this move results in a worsening of one's own position. So here's a typical example from the pawn endgames, where white to move has an extra pawn, wants to convert that pawn, but if he goes directly for the move king c3, this king is getting too active, and after the move king d3, it is going to attack the pawn on c4. We don't really want to see that, because if this happens, we are most likely going to lose both the pawns, and this is going to end in a draw. So this is why, in the initial position, what we do is we ask ourselves a very typical question. That question is simple. What does our opponent want to do? Once that you see that the opponent doesn't have an useful move, then it makes sense for you to look for a way to try and to get back into the same position. Typically, how we are approaching this, we are looking for a three-step maneuver. In the endgames, with pawns, only pawn endgames, we're using the so-called triangulation. But we are going to see in the next examples that besides the triangulation, we also have some other odd number of move maneuvers which are going to help us depending on the piece that we are going to use to do the maneuver. So right now the way to triangulate with the king is as follows: king to a3. We don't want to let the king in, and then after king b6 we are going to triangulate like that. Since this king at some point will have to come in to attack our pawns, and most likely is going to do it now, then we are basically reaching the same position by using our first triangulation. So always an odd number of moves if you want to force the opponent into Zugzwang. This is the idea. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, next he has to come back, and we have won an important tempo. So we go with the king to the right, and this time we still want to get with the king on d5 and take that pawn, but that guy here is a little bit further away from the pawn. Anyway, he has no other choice but to come back on a5 and to try to attack the pawn on c4. And now again we have to be careful. If we once again step with the king on the d3 square, well, we have achieved nothing. It's going to be the same position as before. So once again we are asking ourselves, what is our opponent's next move going to be? And we see he has this a4 square available. Yes, this is true. But actually, his objective is always to step on the b4 square whenever we are stepping on the d3 square, which means that the d3 square is some sort of a mine square for our pieces, for our king in this case. And we are trying to still reach the pawn on c5, but in a slightly different way, avoiding that mine square on d3. And what we are going to do, we'll be doing another triangulation. We'll be going with the king on d2, and after king e4, we will step with the king on the e3 square. King b4 this time would be forced, but he is the first one to step on the mine square. So we are following with the move king d3, and now black is going to be into Zugzwang. He has no useful move. It is his turn, but he wants to stay where he is, and he can't. This is the thing. This is the whole story about the Zugzwang. He is forced to move. Once he moves, we have this free king coming on e4, and after king to a4, now he's trying to do the same thing to us. He's trying to force us into Zugzwang. And if this pawn wasn't on e2, this will be the famous trebuchet. So he will be the one winning the pawn on c4, and he will be the one winning the game. But unfortunately for him, our pawn survived. We can push it up, we can deflect the king, and like that, we can win the game. We're now moving to the second example, where we are going to use the same idea. And actually the triangulation is the most typical thing that happens in the pawn endgames. But if you think about it yourselves, you will see that almost all the maneuvers in the pawn endgames are designed to force the opponent into Zugzwang. We are fighting, as usual, for some extra space, or we are fighting for the critical squares with the help of the opposition. We're using the shouldering, and also we're using the triangulation, eventually trying to force the opponent into Zugzwang. So right now, at this example, at the very beginning, we're trying to win the battle for the opposition. and to promote the last remaining pawn of ours into a queen. The opponent, however, is not going to cooperate. So here, first of all, we have to be tricky. We need to go with the king on f5 and hope that he is going to capture our pawn so that we can capture his pawn and take the opposition. Notice that we are not going to achieve anything by capturing on e5, because after he takes on g7, we will win the pawn, this is true, but his king is going to get in front of the pawn. So we have to be smarter than that. And we have, therefore, to go with the king on f5. Now, if he is cooperating, fine, we'll take on g5, we'll go king f5, pick up that pawn. Push it or not push it, we don't really care. We're going to take it with our own pawn, and we'll be always having the opposition. Opposition is going to eventually force him into Zugzwang. He will have to let our pawn pass, and we are going to turn it into a queen. So he will have to play smarter, and he has this little move king to g8, still waiting for us to capture the pawn first, and then he's going to capture the pawn on g7. So now, just like in the previous example, we have two mine squares. Whoever steps there first likely is going to lose half a point. Of course, it would be premature to take that pawn, as we said, because black has a smart way of gaining the opposition. He should first throw in that move e4 to deprive us of this extra pawn move, and only after we capture then he is going to take the opposition, and we can do nothing to fight it back. But as we said, we can be much smarter than that, and we can do one small triangle here as well with the move king to g4, waiting for him to leave the safe square on g8, and only after that we're going to take the pawn on g5. So this time we're going to play a little bit more tactically, as you're about to see, and we will use another idea, but ultimately this is again triangulation. So the king from f5 is going to g4 and then eventually to the g5 square. He has a couple of choices. One is to sacrifice the pawn instantly, which we're going to take, and after king f7, again we'll be smart, we're going to avoid him taking the opposition by playing the move king f5. And now if he takes, we are the one with the opposition, and if he doesn't, he goes king g8. Well, this time it's a little bit different. Still we cannot capture the pawn, but since his king is standing on the back rank, he is giving us an extra tempo, and that tempo we are going to use to push our pawn into queen, promote it with a check, and make him on the next move. This means that after king g4 he has no other choice but to go with the king on f7, but that was the moment that we were waiting for to complete the triangulation. The triangle has been completed, and we are threatening to go king to h6 and then to help that pawn to get promoted. This is the reason why he neither can take the pawn on g7, which we already know is winning for us, like this, and here we have the extra pawn, and the extra pawn move is going to give us the chance to get the opposition and to force the opponent into Zugzwang. So this is another Zugzwang, but this time we're using the pawn for that Zugzwang. And if he does, instead of this, try to push the pawn up to e4, then we have this little tempo with the king coming on h6, and if he takes our pawn, we are going to promote, and we are going to promote with a check, so that means we're stopping the pawn after this. And or if he doesn't take the pawn, if he goes king g8, well, we can simply capture the pawn on e4. Let's see now how the other pieces are operating in these situations with the following bishop endgame. As we said, in the king and pawn endgames, usually the way to achieve the Zugzwang, we have various ways, but the most typical way is a three-step maneuver. 1, 2, 3, triangulation, 1, 2, 3. The same idea can be applied with the bishops. The bishops can also use three-step maneuver to force the opponent to clear an important diagonal, for example, or to let your pieces into their own camp. So in this particular case, this is how white is doing this. First of all, he goes with the bishop on d3 and he forces the opponent into passive defense with the move bishop to e8. This is clear, but the question is how we're making progress right now. As usual, we're asking this very simple but very important question. What is our opponent's next move going to be? And we can immediately see that he has an only move, which is the move bishop f7. If he moves instead of this the king, we are going to infiltrate from this side. If he moves with the king, this is going to be horrible. If he moves it on f7, we are going to capture the pawn instantly. So his only move will be to go bishop to f7. And then we can get this diagonal for ourselves. But do we have to spend that tempo on that Zugzwang yet, or should we keep it for better days? Well, the logic is usually you're trying to keep your extra reserve pawn moves for better days, for rainy days. And those days didn't come yet. You have a much easier way to force the opponent into Zugzwang here all you have to do is to find a three-step maneuver with this bishop on this diagonal. Do you have enough room for that? You do. You can go bishop c2. He has nothing else but to defend the pawn with the move bishop f7, and then you come back with the bishop on b1. Once that he comes back with the bishop on e8, we go back with the bishop on d3. So we achieve the same position as before, except that this time it is him to move. Nothing else but bishop f7. Then we are going to maneuver with the bishop on b5, force him further into passive defense on g8, force him even further to go on the h7 square. Now it's a giant pawn there, nothing more, nothing less. And the fabulous last move, the reserved pawn move, is actually forcing yet another Zugzwang, and this is why black is forced to resign. Alright, and finally for this video, I would like to show you one example on how we are doing it with the rooks. The rooks are also capable of doing a three-step maneuver. This is a very simple example. After king e5 and king e3, all black has to do is to push the pawn on g5. Now, well, this doesn't even require the three-step maneuver by the second player. But let's assume for a moment that it was black to move. He wants to go in this direction with the king, or he wants to go in that direction with the king to help his rook and to get that pawn promoted. If it was black to move in this situation, then he wouldn't really be sure at a glance how exactly to achieve any progress in this situation. But once that he looks at this rook on a3, he will easily realize that this rook is not going anywhere, and if he wishes to wait, he can wait and then again wait, and he can do a three-step maneuver anytime that he likes, and after that the rook will be forced to move. All you need is a little bit of space, just like in the previous example. In the previous example, the bishop was doing the three-step maneuver just because it had enough room on the diagonal, and in the rook endgames you need enough room to do the three-step maneuver on the file. That's it. That's all you need to know. So basically what I want to say for today is that the Zugzwang is a three-step maneuver in most of the cases, a not number of moves maneuver, and it's a very useful tool if you have large advantage in the endgames, you want to improve your position. One very important question for you to ask always is, what does my opponent want to do? And once that you realize that your opponent has nothing to do, look for a successful Zugzwang, and usually the game is not like that. See you in the next video. We're going to see some more complex examples then.